Hi guys, as you can see here, we have the Fenris preview, which is actually pretty exciting. I know a lot of you guys probably wanted to see Harcetti or, see other additions to the game, balance patches, etc. But here we have Fenris, and I actually think he's really, really insane. Let me explain why. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, oh, Connor, is it the animations? Is it something in his kit? And maybe, kind of, but not to get too far into it or get ahead of myself. His artifact looks pretty crazy. Now, let me explain first what Fenris does as opposed to Harcetti, who, by the way, will be released roughly 24 hours from when I post this video. But just to kind of get through and explain what Fenris is a 5-star Earth Ranger. He has attack imprint, which means, of course, he's mostly focused on his attack. And in this case, he's focused on doing damage. He has 23 crit rate. He has decent substats. He is a Taurus Ranger. Okay, that's fine. Nothing super fast, nothing super slow, but has decent attack and also has 23 crit chance as opposed to 15, which is quite nice. Now, in terms of what his kit does, his S2 makes it so that if he or any ally suffers an extra attack, counterattack, or dual attack, he gains 50 fighting spirit and uses soaring arrow, which is kind of interesting because it's basically the reverse of Commander Pavel, or it's kind of similar to Commander Pavel, where after a certain condition has been met, he just does a big AoE to everyone on the field. Now, to be clear, you'll have to actually go through and see to the end if you wanted to see how much damage this ability did, but it is quite interesting, and it does do decent damage because, number one, or in addition to that, it is pretty interesting because it gives you combat readiness, and it also dispels 1 debuff from all allies. And even despite this having a 2-turn cooldown, this feels similar or reminiscent to Commander Pavel, although it does a little bit less damage and has a bit more utility. Great, that's fine, because you get the combat readiness, maybe not 50, but 30, and you dispel 1 debuff from your allies as opposed to, I guess, giving yourself attack buff. That's okay. Now, here's what you have to keep in mind. Commander Pavel, as opposed to this character, is never going to or never be out damaged in terms of the S2, at least from what we've seen thus far. And in most cases, because Commander Pavel gets the attack increase, if you are able to give attack buff to someone like Fenris before he gets his S2 procced off, this is going to do even more damage, and it's going to obviously be even more impactful. But the fighting spirit is not actually just used specifically for the S2, and it does say fighting spirit is needed or is gained when you use this S2, but it doesn't actually, like, it's not a condition for unwavering will to go off. It's actually the condition for his S3, which is he gives himself greater attack buff for 3 turns. That's pretty crazy, by the way. And then he basically nukes 1 target, and so long as you have enough of a differential between your HP, in other words, if you are in a similar situation to someone like Strays, you can deal up to or deal a 70% increase in damage on his S3, which is quite significant. Now, a lot of this means nothing, and before I get too far ahead of myself as well, his S1 is just like it just does a little bit of damage and gives him speed buff, which is nice compared to someone like Cavill, because Cavill usually gets his 1 turn off and then that's it. Unless if he's on Guiding Light, Cavill's pretty much dead. And again, I won't relate everything to Cavill, but it feels pretty similar to Cavill, to be honest, with the whole fighting spirit and AoE thing. But none of this matters too much until you see the numbers, right? So let's take a look at what the actual numbers do, and then let's talk about the artifact, because that's the coolest part. Now, in terms of what's happening here, you see here that Ran, I believe Ran just defense broke and AoE'd, and then, Fenris and his team got debuffed. And take a look at how much damage this Fenris does. 11.5k, I get it. It's against like a target that has a defense break. But even against the Selene here, the Selene is taking roughly, like 8,000 or 9,000 damage. So maybe not the most incredible thing ever. And you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, it's probably just used in some cases to knock someone out of stealth, like maybe a ML Politis, while doing okay, but not ground-shattering amounts of damage. Okay, that's fine. I already made the comment about maybe you would need attack buff on this character, or you would need to give attack buff. Maybe you run Silver Rain on Ran and you give it to your Fenris. I know a lot of people have been running Ran on Silver Rain specifically so they can give someone like Ludwig attack buff. Whatever the case is, the big thing here, though, is take a look at how much damage this Fenris S3 does. So he gives himself Gab. Mind you, Senya has been procced, by the way. You see this little barrier? So she has her barrier on herself. Very quick, very quick. But that is 26.7k damage. Now, based on what we've seen in terms of the speed tuning of the characters, Fenris was roughly, I believe, a little bit faster or like around the same speed as the Abyssal Eufiend. So we could guess in this case that he's roughly in that 170 to 180 maybe range. But that's fine because as soon as someone does an AoE to him, he gets 30% CR. And that's basically the speed that someone like Commander Pavel has. Now, obviously, if you are fighting anyone that actually does a decent amount of damage, this is obviously cause for concern because if Fenris or Commander Pavel gets countered by like, you know, an Abyssal Eufiend that's on full damage, he just dies. So you're going to have to take that in consideration when you're adjusting how much damage he receives. But as you can see from like the initial hit here that we saw at the very beginning here, the Abyssal Eufiend does the AoE, and it does only end up doing 2.5k, 2.6k, I guess, damage, primarily because the Eufiend is defense broken and, you know, Eufiend scales off of defense. Now, that's really cool, but the thing that I haven't talked about at all this whole time that I actually want to get into now is this artifact, because this thing, I don't want to call it whale bait, but it's kind of whale bait. So, to make it brief, what it says is that it increases the attack of all allies by 5 or 10%, depending on what level you have it at. And after attacking all enemies, you have a 100% chance to increase combat readiness of all allies by 15%. Now let's just like sit with this for a moment, and you can pause the video here for a second if you want to do your own due diligence and think of what character or what rangers in the game could maybe make use of this. AoE attack. Everyone gets pushed by... Oh! Commander Pavel! Oh! Faithless Lidica! Oh! Someone like Knockwall. Now, of course, these depend on what you're fighting against, and someone like Faithless Lidica, you know, tends to get outsped, so maybe you can't run this on some player or on some builds of Faithless Lidica. But for those of you that are super fast, and for, I'm sure you've seen it, players that are like the 310 or super fast Faithless Lidica, and you're trying to, you know, bypass everyone's speed, this is the perfect artifact for a Faithless Lidica. Formerly, it was Sasha Thanes, but man, if you got 100% combat readiness, or you have a 100% chance to increase the combat readiness of all allies by 15%, and you have, you know, an attack increase to all your allies at the same time, this is kind of like Warhorn mixed with Sash, but the condition is just AoEing one time and it's every 3 turns. Now, Sasha Thanes has its own set of uses, and Warhorn has its own value too, but it is a very interesting and pretty well-baity artifact. Arguably, in some cases too, if you're running a cleave that has someone like Commander Pavel, this is another artifact that does pretty well here. Additionally, if you, for whatever reason, want to run this on some of the slower, you know, the slower rangers as well, even someone like Biblis or Seaside Bologna, pretty much anyone you can think of, this is going to be pretty fantastic. Someone like Pavel now has been infamous for being somewhat limited at times because he doesn't AoE push up, or he doesn't have a bridge. If you guys know or familiar with that term, it basically means there isn't someone to immediately take the turn after Pavel, and guess what? Now you have everyone increase their combat readiness push by 15%, which in most cases roughly refers to like about like 45 to 50 speed. So if you have someone that's 250, well, now you're an official bridge for someone, you know, for a team, assuming that you have renewed will on your ranger. Now, keep in mind, however, that although the attack increase is what increases from 5 to 10%, the chance to increase the combat readiness push or the combat readiness of all allies by 15% is also tied to the effect here. Now, personally, I think that Fenris is going to be really cool, and I think that for those of you that are looking to play another cleave character, this is probably going to be the character that you're going to gravitate towards. But keep in mind as well that some of the initial testing or, you know, showcasing that they did for Fenris was against Harsetti as a boss. Presumably this is the Hall of Trials. It has to be the Hall of Trials, right? You know, like it has the points at the top right, and she's got this little special unique thing. Whatever the case is, like she's obviously, or Fenris rather, is obviously going to be used in some PvE. But still, like with your artifact and with his entire kit in general, it looks like this is going to be set up to be a solid cleave character. And for me personally, I'm really excited for him. If you aren't someone that plays cleave, this may be a character that you end up passing on. It is what it is. As far as I can tell, I don't believe he's a limited or anything like that. And it is what it is. He looks like he's very centered around damage. He cleanses and he does a little bit of, you know, he actually, I guess, like, thinking about it now, if you do end up activating his S2, you can cleanse something like the attack down from Abyssal Eufiend, which could be very helpful if you have someone like Ludwig go right after your Fenris or right after your Ran, which is pretty cool. But yeah, all things to consider, I think it's a very creative cleave character. He's got a lot of the cleave or meta cleave character aspects in his kit right now, and that's cool. That's fantastic. I'm a big fan of him. It looks also really fantastic too. If you didn't see his S3 animation, I'll play it real quick because I think it's actually quite it's actually quite cool.
Damage dealt increases proportional to the difference.
You can't see him. I apologize. Just pretend I'm Fenris. You know what I mean?
Skill
like
the magic arrow.
Okay. Point is, you get it. It's pretty cool. He's got pretty cool animations. He's a really cool cleave character. Maybe people will play him on Guiding Light as well. Whatever the case is, though, I think he's pretty interesting, pretty unique, and I'm going to be trying him out and pulling for him. Anyways, thanks again for watching, guys. Long story short, I think his artifact is pretty whale leaning. If you're someone that plays Faith Athletica or a fast knock wall, maybe you could make use of this. Otherwise, even just using Fenris with like Guiding Light or something and making him safe is going to do really well for you. And Fenris, again, is fantastic for the cleave crew, the cleaver players. And yeah, anyways, that's going to be it for this video. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for getting me to where I am, by the way. The second channel has now been monetized. Thanks again for watching and for all the support and all the subs. Goodbye. Have a good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Bye-bye.